Hello and welcome back everyone, we Weeb Online, and today I'm gonna continue the story What If Naruto Mastered to Edit Seals Part 6. If you enjoyed this video, please give it a big thumbs up, and to watch more videos like this, subscribe to my channel and turn that bell notification on so you never miss an upload. Now wasting no more time, let's begin.
Saw Chai. She couldn't help but flinch as if struck as his words sliced into her. He had said it so coldly, as if it didn't matter, that it was almost like he didn't care. But it did. Oh gods, it did. Her chest tightened in a painful way, and knots formed in her stomach. This was her son, the young man she had not seen in years, and he seemed no more pleased to see her than he might a stranger. She knew he hadn't gotten the letter she sent him and that he couldn't live in their house, but shouldn't he be happy that they were back? From what Kurenai had said, the two of them rarely interacted, and judging by the fact that he had his own apartment in a decent part of town, he was doing well for himself. He had Kurenai and Tsunade to help him, and Kakashi had apparently been checking on him from time to time. So, if Kurenai, Tsunade, and Tsunade's apprentice could give him everything but a mother's love, why was her son staring at her with such uncaring eyes when those three could give him everything else? Purple used to be warm and royal, but now it was as cold as amethyst. She could no longer see the joy and curiosity that reminded her of a younger Minato. Instead, she felt like she was looking into the eyes of her war-weary husband. Like a predator, they learned everything they could about her and watched for anything she might do to hurt them. Those eyes had moved around the area more than once, and she wasn't so stupid to think that he wasn't looking for ways to get away in case something went wrong. But what could he be hoping would happen? She was his mother, and all she wanted was for him to be safe and happy. So why would he act like she could hurt him? What could have happened to her son that would have made him act this way? Since she had left, he had grown taller and his body looked a lot like Kakashi's. The tight fit of the blue shirt on him showed that he had been working hard. She could only see a small part of his skin, but what she did see was as pale as she remembered. And his hair, though longer, was still a tangled mess of dark red. Still, it was hard for her to pay attention to anything but his eyes. She knew that her leaving would hurt him because he had always loved his family very much. However, she had hoped that the people in Konoha would have been able to keep him happy and keep that bright, warm personality that her son had always had. What stood in front of her looked more like a statue than the shy boy who hugged his mother and sister every chance he got, even though he only smiled at them and did so very rarely. His smiles were as bright as the sun and always warmed her heart. His lips stayed in a relaxed frown, and his purple eyes watched her and waited for her to say something. How many times had she dreamed that they were together again? In every picture, there was a lot of emotion, but this meeting wasn't like that at all. She had hoped that he would come running to her and give her the biggest hug he had ever given. She wanted to see the tears of joy and the smile that made her day. She had to see that he loved her in his eyes. She thought that might not be true, though. She had done everything she could to get ready for tears, to see the look of betrayal on his face, and to see the pain she had caused him by breaking a promise and taking his family. But still, she had expected that pain to have been caused by the love he held for them. She could have handled his anger, that white-hot rage he might have felt when he saw the woman who had left him and left him dependent on family and friends. She wouldn't have cared if he had attacked her. She would have fought him until he was too tired to stand and then told him everything would be okay. She would have told him she was back and that she wouldn't leave him again. And his anger would have shown how much he cared about them. The amethyst eyes that looked right into her heart didn't love her, and it hurt her very much. She ran after him right away, almost jumping over her desk to get out of the classroom. She wasn't blind to the looks people were giving her, but even though the teacher had said she was taking her brother's spot, the looks weren't mean. If anything, it seemed like they felt sorry for her. Was it because they knew she was his sister, or had it something to do with the fear the blonde had shown earlier? She put it out of her mind for now and ran down the halls after her brother. It was obvious he was upset that he didn't get a team after 4 years of hard work, but he didn't know that was a good thing. Now that she had a team, her mother could focus all her attention onto her brother. The only way for him to do that and move up in his shinobi career was to become an apprentice. She could only imagine how far he would go as Uzumaki Kushina's apprentice. He would probably get to Jounin in a few short years. He would probably move forward quickly. Now, if he had been just a couple of years older than her, he could have been her Jounin teacher. He'd be a lot better than Kakashi, who is a lazy pervert. Even though he wasn't her teacher, she could still go on missions with him once she got to Chunin. She would just have to work hard to get the rank she needed to join him. If she was lucky, she might be able to become a Chunin before he did and go on missions with her mother and brother. There was nothing better than getting paid to go on a trip with your family, especially if they got to save a princess. She couldn't wait to be invited to a royal ball as a thank you. She had been to the palaces of a few daimyo, but they were stiff and dull places. She wanted to go to a palace filled with life and cheer and spend the night dancing as the honored guest of the princess. She laughed a little when she thought about it. It would be so much fun, and having her other family members there would make it even better. She didn't care about the steps, so she jumped over them and kept going. Her brother hadn't been that far ahead of her when he left, and unless he had abandoned his brisk walk to run, she should be catching up with him soon. Soon was right, too. In less than 2 minutes, she was at the front door of the academy and saw her brother standing in the doorway. She could see her mother in the schoolyard smiling at her son from behind his back. Naruto's face turned into a smile. If there was anyone who could cheer him up, it would be their mother. Also, who else could she have told him she wanted to hire him as an apprentice? Deep within her, she could feel her prisoner stir, as if they felt her close proximity to her brother, and she was aware of a heat around the seal. In the autumn of Hai no Kuni, it wasn't a painful heat, but rather a soothing, relaxing heat that felt good. Soon, she'd be able to keep her end of the deal, and she'd never have to worry about being beaten again. Who could stand up to the full power of the Kyuubi no Kitsune in the modern world? She was sure that the fox inside her was happy with what she was thinking. When she turned back to her family, both she and her mother lost their smiles when her brother said something. "You're about 4 years late, aren't you?" Her mother jumped when she heard the words, but Naruto jumped when she heard the tone. Never had she heard her brother speak like that to anyone. Based on how they acted around each other, she thought Naruto and Kurenai hated each other. Even so, his voice was always politely warm. Her brother shouldn't have said anything so cold and biting. He was too bright and friendly to have said such cold things. He was like the sun, so where was the brightness they all knew and loved? Naruto got out from behind her brother because she moved forward while talking. She moved to the side to watch because she didn't know what to do. Her mother didn't seem to know what to say as she looked at her firstborn with sadness and pain in her eyes. On the other hand, her brother didn't seem to care. The anger in those beautiful purple eyes only lasted a second or two, and then it was gone, replaced by calm, focused eyes that took in everything around him. She could have sworn he had peered at her from the corner of his eyes for a split second, but she couldn't be sure. And Naruto-kun finally managed Kushina. The way she said the words made it sound like she was about to cry. Naruto wasn't sure if it was because he didn't react to those cutting words or because seeing him reminded her that she had left him behind and was just now seeing how much he had grown in the 4 years she was gone. Maybe it was a little bit of both. When he heard his name, Naruto gave his head a slight tilt. Uzumaki-sama. It was clear that calling her by such a formal name hurt a lot more than his first accusatory sentence. Her mother let out a sound that was somewhere between a choked gasp and a sob. Naruto-kun Sachai. She put out her arms a little bit, as if she wanted him to hug her. His eyes again lit up with anger, but he forced it down with a deep breath. Uzumaki, I am not your son. He hissed it through clenched teeth as he tried to keep himself under control, but his mother could still hear it clearly. Naruto could see that her mother's heart was breaking and that her eyes were wide with horror and shock. She tried so hard to speak and breathe, but she couldn't. Tears ran down her face. Kushina's legs gave out under the weight of her sadness and she fell to her knees. Her heart was too heavy for her legs to carry. No, 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 no. Her mother buried her face in her hands and shook her head in denial. Naruto made a sad face. She knew this was one of her mother's biggest fears because it was the dream that kept coming back to her while they were traveling. Now, everything was coming true. Naruto ran to her side and quickly got down on her knees to give her mother a comforting hug. As if she were a lifeline, her mother wrapped her arms around her and pulled her close as she cried into her clothes. Naruto's blue eyes met her brother's purple eyes as she looked up from her upset mother. On his face, there was no sympathy or pity, but there was also no disgust or hatred. There was nothing, absolutely nothing, on his face except a cold lack of interest. He seemed to be looking down at two strangers, like he was just a passerby who had stopped to see why two women were on the floor. And then he turned around and left. "Nyai-kun," she called out to him. He stopped for a moment and looked back over his shoulder at her. As he went on, he didn't say a single word more. Naruto could feel her heart shaking. Hadn't he said he loved her and would protect and watch out for her? So, why did he turn away from her now? She answered with a whisper from a traitorous part of her mind that hurt her more than her brother's lack of interest. "Because you were the one who turned away from him." She hugged her crying mother tighter and let her own tears join those of her mother. So, the Uzumaki clan of Konoha fell down in the schoolyard and cried. From the top of the academy building, the only person there saw how sad they were. He didn't care. He thought they should be glad Naruto hadn't reacted more angrily, because if he had, Kakashi was sure he would have lost control of his own anger. Naruto may have made a new life for himself without them, one he didn't want to give up, But Kakashi's life didn't change. He might have been okay with Kushina. His sensei could have picked a lot worse than the energetic redhead swordswoman. But Naruto was the legacy of the man who had become like a father to him. Knowing he had been hurt was bad enough, but knowing it was because of the woman who had given birth to him, the woman the Yondaime had given his children to care for, made the copy ninja so angry he couldn't think straight. Then she just showed up and thought everything would work out. Negative. If Naruto was willing to work with her, then that was fine. He was the one who had been hurt by this, after all. It might have been okay for Kakashi to be angry on his behalf, but just because he thought something needed to go a certain way didn't mean that the son of his sensei agreed. Since this was for Naruto, he would get the last call. His one eye looked straight down at the two women. What gave them the right to cry? They both cried, and they did it together. Whether they knew it or not, they had left Naruto to take care of himself. The fact that he had stepped in to watch over the boy didn't change the fact that Kushina hadn't even asked him if he could take care of his sensei's son. He didn't even know she was leaving until he heard that Naruto had been locked out of the clan's main building. Even if he hadn't been locked out of the compound, Naruto would have needed help getting ready to live on his own for at least the first few months. Kurenai was a good kunoichi and a beautiful woman, but her past probably made things hard for her. He sometimes wondered if Kushina had forgotten about Kurenai's childhood and how she couldn't deal with men because of it. She had been doing fine in the years since his sensei, Namikaze Minato, the only person she seemed comfortable with, killed the Kyuubi by sealing them away, but maybe that's why Kushina didn't think much of it. Kushina had only seen Kurenai interact with her husband. Lately, Kurenai had been able to have full conversations with some of the grocers she went to. To the redhead, it must have seemed like she had beaten her demons, but now that she could meet Naruto, even if it was with her friend Mitarashi Anko there, you could probably say that she was getting better. Well, at least in the case of Naruto. But let's be honest, Naruto was the only one who really cared. Who cared if she couldn't talk to a random person well when they came up to her? As long as her problems didn't get in the way of her time with her sensei's son, everything was fine. Even so, when Kushina left, Kurenai was in no shape to take care of a young boy by herself. On the other hand, he was very accessible. Would he have had to stop what he was doing? Yes, but what did that have to do with taking care of his sensei's son? But maybe staying in ANBU was the right choice in the end. If he hadn't been busy, he wouldn't have been able to cover all of Naruto's illegal actions. Even though it didn't make her actions better, at least Naruto didn't have to deal with any more bad luck. Of course, crying on the ground because the person you turned your back on isn't so quick to let you back into their life didn't earn them any points in his book, and neither did the fact that he had to work with the Uchiha on Team 7 without Naruto. He didn't want a team, but the redhead would have given him a good reason to teach if he had to take one. Kushina, on the other hand, had other ideas. He didn't know why the Hokage had agreed, since her last plan had fallen apart in an instant. But she had managed to persuade him not to put her son on a team so that she could take him on as an apprentice. Kakashi didn't think anyone would ask Naruto what he thought. He was a fairly experienced jounin, so he knew that Naruto needed a team to reconnect with the village she had returned to. He also knew that none of the clan children would have been taken away because that would have broken the law of their families. So why couldn't the old man have put him in place of the Haruno? Sure, based on his grade, the teams would be unbalanced, and it would break traditions that have been passed down for generations. But who gives a flying fuck? He wanted Naruto to join a team because Naruto needed one and because he was the only one who could teach Sasuke Uchiha how to use the Sharingan. It was just right. Well, it would be great if you didn't have to put Naruto on the same team as his sister. Kakashi didn't think he'd be happy, but he was sure that if the teacher was on his side, they could make it work. He didn't have to worry about that, though, because he wouldn't be able to teach his sensei's son. He was sure there were more, but he guessed that they were all tied down in the same way and couldn't help him. Whether that was planned or just Naruto's bad luck, it seemed like his only choice was to train with his mother. He thought for a moment that Kushina's good luck was what gave her such a great chance, but Naruto reminded him of the other choice the boy had. He had just walked away. Kakashi was almost as proud as he was when the boy got his first kill, and a little more proud than when he had that pretty Yamanaka on his arm. He did this by saying some hurtful things to those who had left him. That made it even better and, hopefully, drove home the point that this Naruto, this shinobi, was not the little boy they had left behind. But if you know Kushina, you know that it would take a lot more than that for her to agree. Well, he didn't have to worry about it. All that really mattered was that Naruto was okay. G smiled happily as he looked at the clock. He still had half an hour before he had to meet up with his team. He pulled out his trusted Ika from the pouch on his kunai. He still had a lot of time to do what he wanted. He didn't care about the crying below him and went back to where he had been. Who can say? Maybe being a sensei wouldn't be too bad. When their leader walked into the room with a low growl in his throat, they both looked up in surprise. Sharing a quick glance, the male of the two set about clearing off the desk they had been using, and his female comrade moved towards the man to whom they had pledged themselves. She led him to his desk by putting one hand on his arm and the other on his shoulder. As soon as he sat down in the black office chair, she moved her hands to the sides of his neck and gently rubbed the tight muscle. "What's the matter, my lord?" As she continued to care for him, she whispered the words softly into his ear, and he seemed to relax under her skilled hands and familiar voice. A few more seconds went by as he enjoyed the simple pleasure that her hands gave him, but his voice, which came out in an unfamiliar cold tone, reached her ears as he spoke softly. It was clear that he was trying to hold back his anger, and it gave her great pleasure to see that she could help him with her gentle touch. "Our plans must change." As one of the knots was worked out of his shoulder, his angry growl quickly turned into a happy one. "May I ask, Your Majesty, what happened?" Purple eyes opened, and he saw his second favorite coworker standing in front of his desk with his arms behind his back, but in a pretty relaxed way. "As you know, my blood has come back," Naruto went on after Sai gave a quick nod to show that he knew what was going on. "This year, there are too many graduates, including Naruto, to put on teams in a good way." Behind him, he heard a sharp intake of breath, and he could see Sai's face change into a worried frown. "I'm sure you both understand what this means. We have to change our plans, but I'm sure I can find a way to make sure this isn't a total loss. It will, however, take us a lot more time to plan than what we've already done for our current plan." "I see." Sai's frown got worse. After thinking for a moment, he asked, "Would you like me to start putting everything back the way it was before? Or would you rather I change things? What we have now we'll have to do until we figure out how to make the most of my situation." "Understood. If you don't mind, I'll tell the wolves." The pale boy had been taught the Konoha salute, with his right arm held horizontally and his fist over his heart, from a young age. Now, in front of his younger lord's desk, he did it with great pride. With a wave of his hand, Naruto sent him away, and he was left to do his job. Mai continued to work the muscles in her lord's upper back in silence. She had long since finished her self-assigned task, but neither she nor her lord wanted to break the quiet peace in his office. She decided that she couldn't keep massaging the same muscles forever, so she let her arms fall in front of his face and around his neck. She hid her face for a moment in the crook of his neck as she lightly ran her fingers over the blue fabric of his shirt. She put her lips to his ear and tried to be as quiet as possible in his office. It was almost as if she was afraid that if she spoke too loudly, this safe place might turn against them. "Naruto-sama, do you need anything else? Food? Drink? Maybe a warm bath or someone to talk to?" He leaned back into her touch and took pleasure in the hug. Mai was definitely his favorite subordinate, and she was also a great friend. "That sounds really nice. I think we should call it a day and go hang out at my place for a while. I wasn't going to be running the wolves for the next few months, so losing one day isn't a big deal." "Naruto-sama, I'm glad to hear that. It sounds like you've had a hard day. I would be glad to help you sleep." Even though she said this, she did nothing to pull away from him. Maybe he could turn that one day into a week off. It seemed like a good idea. A series of knocks woke him up from his comfortable sleep and put him in Mai's lap, which was just as comfortable. She was happy to keep him company while he slept as she hummed a simple tune and ran her hands through his red hair. He didn't get up to answer the door because he was too comfortable on the couch. This was a risky thing for a shinobi to do, even if there were good guards around. Instead, he looked to a corner of the room. When the shadows formed the snarling face of a wolf, all he had to do was nod, and it was done. He could hear the locks on his door being taken off and the door being cracked open just a bit so he could see who was there. So far, the wolves stationed around his apartment hadn't stopped them, so the identification didn't do much more than tell the people inside his home who they would be dealing with. He didn't hear what was being said and didn't want to take his head off of such a nice pillow, so he just laid there and waited for whoever had come to visit. "Did you sleep well, master?" Her soft voice often lacked warmth when she was doing her work with the wolves, but he liked hearing it in the less formal setting of his home. "Pretty well, thanks. You are a very good pillow." Even though he couldn't see her because he was facing away from the couch, he knew she gave a quick nod and could hear her faint laugh. "I'm happy that I could help." And she had been of service. When he went back to his apartment after a week, she made him a quick meal and left him to eat while she took a bath. She got back in time to eat some of the meal with him. After that, she helped him take a bath and gave him another massage. After everything was done, they sat down on his couch, and it wasn't long before he fell asleep. "You're just too nice to me," he stuttered. She laughed and shook her head, making a smirk with her lips. "Naruto-sama deserves only the best. "Oh, Naruto-sama is it? How cute." There was a new voice, but it sounded very familiar. "Mitarashi-san, I'm glad you came to see me. Please sit down." As she walked into his line of sight, she smiled and crossed her arms over her chest. "I'd love to, but it looks like your pretty little girlfriend has taken the best spot." She didn't waste any time. "You're welcome to it, Mitarashi-sama, as long as Naruto-sama doesn't mind me getting up." "Heh, kid, it looks like you found a good one." Anko didn't care that the young woman frowned when her lord was called a child. Instead, he sat down in front of them on the floor, leaning back against the couch. In less than 2 seconds, her purple hair was no longer in the ponytail she always wore, and Naruto was busy straightening it with his fingers. She never tried to stop him, because she didn't care. He had said he liked it when her hair was down, so if that's what he wanted, she would let him have it. Not only had he taken away a burden she had been carrying for a long time, but at times like this he almost seemed like the child he should have been. There were so few and special times when he was like this that there was no reason to mess it up. Anko finally spoke up after a few minutes of him running his fingers through her hair like Mai was doing with his. "So, I found out what happened with the teams. Mai was the only one who saw her master raise an eyebrow at that." "Did you?" "News gets around very quickly. Usually as fast as a chunin can run," she said with a smile. "News about them spread like wildfire." "Interesting." Anko gave a nod. "Quite. I heard that you weren't put on a team, as I was saying. I don't like it because you were able to trick me into a trap you had set up." Anko still didn't know what he had done to make these wolves like him, but it had to be something big. How else could you explain the fact that they helped catch her, fought so hard against the Yamanaka, and spared guards to make sure he was safe? "But I think it could be a lot of fun." "Oh, how fun is it?" "Well, T and I is always busy, but we interrogators don't have much to do most of the time. As such, we tend to get a lot of time off. Seeing as you are now a shinobi, I wouldn't be too opposed to requesting some help on missions from our active reserve lists." Even though Naruto and Mai couldn't see it, they both knew she was smiling. Naruto gave a small shrug while his head was still resting on Mai's lap. "That sounds good. I wouldn't mind a mission now and then until I get a team." "Fine, then it's decided. You and I are going to be the most famous shinobi team ever." Naruto gave a deep chuckle and even Mai let out a quiet giggle. "Sure, Mitarashi-san, you should do things right if you're going to do them right." "Exactly. When it comes to doing the right thing," she smirked at him by turning her head around. "You got your diploma today, so you owe me that dinner." "Ah, I suppose I do." He looked at Anko's smile and then back up at Mai, who was still playing with his hair but had a happy smile on her face. "I don't think either of you would mind if I bought you 2 dinner tonight, right?" "Oh, Naruto-kun, one woman isn't enough for you." The first person to answer was Mai. "Of course not, Naruto-sama deserves the best." The girl's quick answer made Anko cough up air, which made Naruto laugh hard. He couldn't remember the last time he had laughed. While her lord showed how amused he was, Mai smiled a soft smile. He didn't look this happy very often. A few giggles here and there showed that he was amused, but to see him laugh, seeing him like this made her feel warm inside, and she smiled down at him. She would do anything to keep him the way he was. All she cared about was making her master happy. Relaxed wasn't the right word for him as he walked through Konoha with Anko and Mai on his arms, but he was at ease knowing that the wolves were keeping a silent watch over him. Even though there weren't that many, the patrolling ANBU made it more than enough. A person walking by gave him a small nod when he looked at them, and he had to stop himself from smirking. The ANBU used their presence to stop trouble from happening, but his wolves stayed hidden among the flocks. They couldn't risk being found out so early in the game, so they only wore masks in their headquarters, which Sai called the den, and when they were working outside of Konoha. Hopefully, they won't have to worry about that for a while. It was going to be a wonderful day when his wolves could run around in plain sight. He nodded back and then turned his attention to the people around him. Mai lightly touched his right arm, as if she didn't want to touch him that much in public. She tried hard to keep the bored look she usually wore, but her light blush and the look of uncertainty that had crept over her face ruined it. Still, he knew she was keeping a close eye on the crowds for any dangers. She always had a few knives on her, and he had no doubt that she would bury 2 of them into anything she thought was dangerous. On the other hand, Anko seemed fine with being seen on his arm, which was the other arm. She walked calmly by his side. Maybe she was used to the stares and slight looks of disgust, or maybe she didn't care what other people thought. Either way, she was probably more interested in where they would go for dinner than in any rumors that might spread. He didn't know for sure if she was carrying any weapons, but based on what he knew about her, it was safe to assume that she was. He tried not to think about what she was wearing or how few places there were to hide a weapon. The last thing he needed to do was give her more reasons to make fun of him. A light breeze blew past them, carrying the smell of fall with it. For a moment, he wondered if he should have brought his cloak. He left the cloak and Emrai's tooth at home tonight, but he had a kunai holster on each leg just in case something went wrong. When he looked down at his regular blue shirt and black pants, he thought for a moment that he probably should have worn something else. It's too late now to change it, he wondered. Even though he wasn't the worst dressed in the group, Anko's strange choice of clothes was more suited to bar hopping in the red light district than going out to a nice dinner. Of course, no one would tell Mitarashi Anko something like that, and there weren't many people who would want to. She worked hard to get a great body, and she was proud to show it off. And, like a lot of other people, he liked looking at it. He would lie if she asked him about it so she wouldn't tease him, but he had a feeling she already knew. When she caught him looking at her, she almost seemed happy. He knew one thing about the woman, and that was that she liked to be noticed. She could have gotten it from anyone, as long as they kept their hands to themselves. He was happy to be one of the people who gave her the attention she so wanted. Now that he was paying her so much attention, he missed the blue eyes looking at him as he carried the two women through the busy streets of Konohagakure. Maybe it would have been better if he hadn't seen them. Since he was happy, it would have been a shame to ruin it. It was there for a moment and then gone, but she couldn't have missed it. She could feel him as he faded away, like the touch of a lover you would never see again. But no matter what, she would find a way to see him again. How her body shook in that short moment, and how it hurt when he went away again. Even though he was right there, she couldn't do anything. When she caught a glimpse of the sun, it was so bright that the darkness around her got 100 times darker. As soon as she realized how warm he made her feel, the cruel mistress of fate stole it away. She could beg and plead, but he couldn't hear her or see that she needed him again from inside this prison. 2 long, miserable years had passed, and all she could think about was getting back to him. 2 years of nightmares and worries that he might never take her back. And now, when she was so close to getting away, salvation was again taken away. She wanted to scream, cry, and get back at everything that had put them apart, but most of all, she wanted him. Over the last few years, she got closer and closer to being reunited with him every second, while he moved farther and farther away every second. Move, go after him. It was a mix of a scream and a desperate sob, and she wanted her jail to hear her. Why don't you see him? Can't you feel him? Do not let him get away. It wouldn't help, because her prison couldn't hear her cries like her warden could. No, he had given her so much freedom and trusted her so much that she could speak into his mind. His sister had not been as trusting, which was probably smarter than she would like to admit. He had put his faith in her, but she had lied to him. Tatsuki's death wasn't her betrayal, because that was what was best for him, even if he couldn't see it or wouldn't accept it. She had betrayed him not by killing the prostitute but by doing it behind his back. Then, instead of saying she was sorry for doing it without his permission and for not taking the time to convince him that this was the best way, she left him. She abandoned him when he needed her the most. He was most helpless when you left him. She gave up on him when she could have become the most important thing in his life. She could feel anger and jealousy seeping out of her prison, which told her 2 things. First, she knew that she had seen her brother, and second, that he already had someone else. She could have guessed that. It had been 2 years, so it was clear that someone else could have come into his life. She knew that they would be competing for his attention later, but a part of her couldn't help but be happy about it. She knew how much he had appreciated her company. Even though it wasn't the same as when Yamanaka was with him all the time, she knew how much knowing he had a constant companion helped him get through each day. Then she had not only left him, but she had also left him those words. These awful, awful words. If he had found someone new, though, it was likely that those words would haunt her more than they did him. Even though he said those things, he seemed to be able to make friends, but it's possible that those words kept her from ever getting close to him again. Even with those hurtful words, she knew she wasn't good enough for him. She thought he looked calm as he walked down the street. It was nothing like what she had seen just hours earlier. Gone was the anger, that frozen rage that was barely kept in check by clenched teeth. She had the feeling that the 2 of them walking with him made him feel most at ease. There was a brief flash of jealousy in her heart. He was her brother, so why were these 2 able to spend time with him when she couldn't? She should have been the one walking with him, and she should have been the one to calm him down. Instead, she was just another person in the crowd, watching as her brother got further and further away. She tried to keep track of him as best she could as she moved through the crowd. He seemed to have no trouble getting through the crowd, even though he had a friend on each arm. Both women were older than him, but they clung to her brother like trollops. The woman on his left was more obviously older. The oldest girl in the group was only wearing a small skirt and an open coat over fishnet. She looked like her brother had just pulled her out of one of the many bars or clubs in the red light district. She had a happy grin on her face and showed no shame for what she had done. It was easy to see that her brother kept looking over at her, probably attracted by the way the older woman looked. Naruto would bet that the prostitute was trying to get her poor brother to fall in love with her for some bad reason. The second woman, who was only a few years older than her brother and acted much more calmly, didn't seem as bad. Her hands gently rested on his arm, making just enough contact to let people know who she was with and to let him lead her through the streets of Konoha. When Naruto saw the woman's face, she could tell she was a little embarrassed, but she didn't know why. On the other hand, the older woman was a pretty good guess. Was this quiet person a pal? She might have been a friend's sister or someone who had gotten lost. But Naruto liked her a lot more than the other girl. Even though she was dating her brother, Naruto had to admit that he could have picked someone worse. At least she wasn't the other woman. One would not be wrong to say that Naruto really didn't like the purple-haired woman who was hanging off her brother. If all goes well, the woman will lose interest and leave her brother with his dark-haired friend. At least then she'd have a better chance of moving into the group to talk to her brother or finding him alone. Of course, it would be best if they could both just leave right now. She needed answers, so the sooner she could talk to him, the sooner she could get them. She needed to find out more about the blonde from the academy, the Yamanaka who had stopped her, and figure out why she was so afraid of him. She had to find out why he seemed so cold and distant. She wanted to know what he had been doing for the past few years. What was he up to? With whom did he stay? Why didn't he want to talk with his mother or sister? That probably made her feel the worst. 4 years ago, they were really close, but now he acted like he had never met them. Had they been gone for so long that he couldn't remember them? Was it because he'd forgotten about them? No, that didn't work. There was no way her brother could ever forget them. He loved them both too much. Then there had to be something else she was missing. She would find out what was going on. The more he heard about his prince, the more he liked him. He was overjoyed to hear that Naruto killed his first person 4 years ago, and he was shocked when he killed his best friend 2 years later. When he heard that someone had turned against his godson, it made his blood boil. But when he heard that the clan had been brought to its knees, even without violence, it made him very happy. Even though the picture was perfect, it was way too old now, 6 years after it had been made so well. It had been replaced by a new portrait of the same person, only older. He felt cold chills go down his spine when he looked into those bright purple eyes. The lips stayed in a neutral frown, as if it were bad that his image was stuck in a picture frame. His features were sharper now that he was a young man instead of a boy. This gave him a sense of nobility that was much stronger than the princely image he had before. To compare that picture to this one is like comparing a dead pig to God. Still as red as blood, his prince's hair had grown into a tangled crown of crimson that reached his shoulders. Orochimaru couldn't help but agree with the artist's choice to pull some of his hair into a small ponytail at the base of his neck, which made the picture look more royal. When compared to the dark background, the pale skin stood out like the moon. It was not natural and couldn't be natural to have such perfect skin. But this picture showed that it was. He could choose to believe that the artist was lying to him when they painted this masterpiece, but that would be to doubt the beauty of his prince. Orochimaru could never doubt his prince. Since the prince left the village a little more than a decade ago, he hadn't seen his beloved prince, but the artist had. He made plans for him to be brought into the village and put his spies in danger to make sure that what people saw was the truth. It had been well worth the effort. Bad news eventually replaced the good news, and it seemed that Kushina had decided to go back. He didn't know if she had met her son yet or if he was back with the family that had abandoned him. Until he knew for sure, he couldn't give her any more gifts. Too bad, because he had finally found something worth giving away. He looked away from the painting for a moment to look at the sleeping woman in front of him, or more specifically, the necklace that was on her bare chest. In the dim torchlight of this room for his prince, a circle of golden coils shone brightly. He couldn't believe he had found something like this. He was always surprised by how lucky he seemed to be when his goal had something to do with his godson. Yes, this would be the perfect gift for the young prince. It would bring them closer together than any other gift he had given before. Torchlight seemed to agree as he looked at the golden coils of the necklace, which made him smile. Given what was in front of him and, more importantly, what it stood for, he was tempted to keep it for himself, but that wouldn't do. Even though it had been 4 years, the prince had only gotten 2 gifts. It was not right. He had to make up for 8 years and couldn't find anything to do for the last 2. He could not and would not take this away from him. Anyhow, it was better in his hands. He was Orochimaru the Snake Sannin, and the amulet of a was useless to him. His prince, on the other hand, could use it, so it would go to him. That took care of 1 gift, so he only had 9 more to go. His eyes wandered from the necklace to the person who was wearing it. He found it strange that she had long black hair like his and skin almost as pale as his. 2 pale fingers slowly moved over her cheek, but he didn't worry about waking her up. She no longer slept because she was tired, but because he told her to. From her cheek, his fingers moved down her neck, across her chest, and stopped just above her navel where the red sheet covering her feet stopped. When he thought about it, it felt strange to touch himself without feeling it, because this flesh, which was her flesh, would soon be his flesh. He briefly considered taking advantage of the fact that she was sleeping, but quickly got rid of the idea. He wasn't going to let another body contaminate his future vessel, even if it was also him. He crept back up her body and looked over her red lips like a ghost. He carefully split them apart, and it didn't take long for them to reach her tongue. This was the prize, and the whole reason he chose this body to be his vessel. No one had ever heard of a person being able to control such a strong muscle the way this woman could before. But now it was here, waiting to be taken. He couldn't pass up the chance to stretch out his tongue as if it were a fifth limb, especially since none of the other candidates had anything more interesting to offer. He had briefly hoped that he could catch a Uchiha, but it looked like that was out of reach for now. He would have to wait until the last survivor had kids he could take or until he could get the last Uchiha himself. The second choice would save him time, but the first choice would give him a much better chance of success. He took his fingers out of her mouth and used them to open one of her yellow eyes. She looked so much like a snake and so much like him that he had to wonder if he didn't have a child he didn't know about. Whether she had a seed or not, her body would be his in 2 weeks, and it would stay his flesh for the next 2 years. He knew that a lot could happen in 2 years, and he was a little bit curious about how he would introduce himself to his godson. On the other hand, that might be good for him. His spies told him that his prince was often with women, and it almost seemed like that was all he did all the time. If that was the case, it might be better to meet this way. And if his little prince was stunned by the beauty of this body, that was all the better to win his trust and bring him home. Yes, home. This was the only place where he could live the life he deserved, because everyone here would do what he wanted. If the prince was still interested in him after finding out who he was, that's fine. In the end, every prince needs a loving queen to show him the way. Since his godson was going to live forever, it wouldn't hurt for her to stay female for a while longer. What were a few decades as a woman when compared to his prince's happiness? The noonday sun shone brightly into the house, but the only person inside couldn't feel its warmth or light. There was a chill that clung to her, a deep blackness of despair and misery. She didn't even get to her bedroom before she started crying and fell on the soft carpet in front of the green couch in her living room. This couch, where she had sat and read stories to her kids, planned her wedding with her fiancé, and made love to her husband many times, was now where her tears fell as she buried her face in the familiar cushions. Even though he only said a few words, they cut into her heart with the same icy sharpness they had when he said them. One sentence was more than enough to make her remember all of her mistakes, fears, and deepest regrets, and he said it without mercy or hesitation. She knew that she deserved it. The blame was all on her shoulders, the same shoulders that were shaking now as she cried so hard she couldn't stop. If she hadn't left, she wouldn't be having these problems. Instead, she'd be congratulating her son on graduating from the academy, and asking him what he'd like to eat for their party dinner. They would all be here as a family, enjoying each other's closeness and the familiar warmth they had always shared. Tonight, it seemed like she was the only one there, since Naruto had left to try to bring Naruto home. Since he was locked out of his house 4 years ago, this was not his home. She had seen that he now lived in a new place, far from the clan district. A cozy little apartment had taken on the role. Since when had he lived there? Was he living alone or did he have a roommate? A young woman with long black hair had left his apartment. Was she a kind of roommate to help keep costs down? She might have been a friend he made while they were gone or a kind of older sister figure. Until she found Naruto, she wouldn't get answers to these and a lot of other questions. And it was making her crazy. She needed to know what had happened and what he had been through while she was away. If not, she would never be able to make up with him. The idea of not making things right and not putting them back together again was horrifying. Not just because she had hurt her son, but also because it seemed like she would never be able to fix the relationship that had broken down while she was gone. Was it really so bad to be left with other people? Or was it just the fact that she'd left him? He brought up the fact that she had promised to be there as soon as they saw each other again. Instead, she took his sister away and left him without family. She had always thought of Kurenai as her daughter, and Tsunade was the godmother of her children, but that didn't make up for the fact that the ties of blood had been broken. The Uzumaki value family above all else, and it doesn't matter if your family is blood or not. It was unthinkable that blood would turn against blood, and yet she had done that very thing. There was no reason to leave an Uzumaki behind. People thought it was better to die with family than to live knowing you had turned your back on them. This was true even if staying would kill them, you, and everyone else in your group. She just couldn't get herself to do it. She left him behind because she was scared for her baby and worried about his health and future. She had lied to her family, and she hadn't even sent a damn letter. She knew that hearing from her after she left would have meant a lot to him. But she also knew that he would answer her letters. She could tell him not to because they would be moving around a lot on the trip. But it would have been terrible to send him a letter that he couldn't answer. What else would she have to tell him besides how his sister was getting better? He wouldn't be able to answer her questions about his life. In the end, he would get angry because all he heard about was how much his sister seemed to be favored. He would never be able to tell her what he was thinking, so she couldn't tell him they were wrong. But what he would have said would have been much worse. If she knew how much he missed them and heard him beg for them to come back, her heart would break. She knew she couldn't have done it because the first letter he sent would have probably sent her back to Konoha and put Naruto back in danger. She couldn't treat him that way. Still, maybe that would have been the best thing. Maybe the chance of hurting his chakra coils and taking away his future as a shinobi was better than hurting her relationship with her son and tearing the family apart. But it was too late to change things, so all she could do was regret. More tears shook her body, and both her mind and body were tired. She probably needs a nap right now. The sweet bliss of doing nothing could do her a lot of good. Her body thought this was a good idea, but her heart and mind didn't agree. As soon as her eyes started to close, two frozen pools of amethyst stared accusingly at her. Are you just going to cry yourself to sleep? I can only imagine how many times he did that while wondering where his family had gone. The words did not come from his mouth, but they did not come from hers either. Her voice and her son's voice mixed together to sound like a mouth full of razors. Each lash of his tongue tore at her heart. It was right, though. Naruto must have spent a lot of nights like the one she was having right now, but she had found a way to keep going for 4 years. Look at you, you're so sad, she said. The voice hiccuped. You have no right to feel bad about yourself for things you did wrong. You deserve this pain more than he does. Even though they were harsh, the words made her cry until she had nothing left to cry about. She got up with shaking arms and went to her room. The bottom line was that she had hurt her son, and that was that. She had to get herself together if she wanted to be able to help him. She took a shower that was much longer than it should have been. Twice, she cried in the steaming water, but both times she was able to stop because she knew her son was counting on her to make things right. By the time she left her room in sweatpants and a loose robe, the sun was turning the sky a deep orange color. As she sat at her kitchen table with a warm cup of tea and watched the sun go down behind the horizon, she had a simple realization that would help her move forward. Tomorrow is a new day, and I'll have another chance to fix things. It made me feel better to think about that and know that there was still hope. If I can't get them right by tomorrow, I'll try again the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that, until I do. When Kushina went to bed that night, she was much more calm, and she dreamed right away of a big, happy family. The soft smile that spread across her lips all night was beautiful, but she had no one with whom she could share it. Still, it was strange for her to know that at least one person was always following her. She knew that the Hyuga guards who patrolled the compound would see her, but that wasn't the same thing. The Hyuga members just saw her while doing quick checks of the area. Her shadows, on the other hand, were always there. They kept an eye on her and made sure she was safe. It was a miracle that the guards hadn't caught them yet. Kyan said that it was because they were just that good. But Katomi quickly shut down his smartass comment by saying that they had help from SEALs. It wouldn't hold up to close inspection, but it would be enough to get away from the Hyuga guards for a moment. And that was all they really needed. As long as no one knew they were there, no one looked for them. And as long as no one looked, they wouldn't be found. It worked pretty well, at least for now. Hinata was thinking when a door nearby opened and a face peered out to tell her she was right. Hinata-sama, we'd like to talk to you, they said. The first thing she did was turn on her Byakugan, but there was nothing there to meet her. That was kind of scary. Based on what he said, there was at least one other person there, but she couldn't see what was happening inside. There weren't that many rooms in the compound that could be completely private. No one could remember how they had done it in the past, not even the older people, whose homes could still be seen. Because of this, the Hyuga always acted in the same way. When anyone can look into your life at any time, you have to act in the best way possible. Because of this, rooms like this one were very sought after. Now, there were only two big questions. How did this person, who was obviously a branch member because he had a band around his head, get into this room for so long? And why did they want her to go in? He gave the man a nod and stepped back, which let one of her guards quickly check out the room. Hinata was afraid to go in, but the fact that the wolf didn't seem to be hurt made her feel a little better. When she got there, she saw something she didn't understand. People of all ages from the branch clan were crammed into the room by the dozens. The torches gave off a lot of light, but they also cast a lot of shadows on the people in the room, making it almost impossible to tell who was there. The crowd broke up, making it possible for someone to get to the other side. She was sure that her guard had to move to the end of the room to avoid being found. But what she saw at the end of the room was the most confusing thing to her. There was a portrait of her, but it wasn't of him. Why was this picture there? Where did they get it? And what did it have to do with her? This way, Hinata-sama. The door shut behind her, and two people moved to guard it as the person who let her in led her through the crowd to a picture of herself. As she got closer, though, she started to think that this picture wasn't of her, but of her mother. That made a bit more sense, both because there were likely to be a lot of pictures of her mother and because the branch members had been very fond of her. When they got to the end of the room, she felt her hidden guard put a comforting hand on her arm to make sure she knew they were there. She was also pretty sure that her other guard had moved to make sure she was protected on both sides in case something went wrong. The person who walked her in took a step back and went back into the crowd as a young woman helped an older man to the front. "Hinata-sama," he said. His bow almost knocked him over, but the young woman next to him did her best to hold him up. "Fate has spoken for you, the one who won't be branded. You are destined to lead the Hyuga." This was a little bit of a shock, but not a big one. Even though she had never believed in fate because neither of her parents did. Most of the clan had believed in its mysterious power for as long as anyone could remember. Even so, she hadn't thought that the fact that Naruto had helped her with the seal would mean anything to them. Of course, that made a little more sense. Since most of the clan believed in fate, they said that anything that happened was because of fate. She was kicked out of the head family, but the seal of the branch family didn't have any power over her. This must have seemed like a miracle. She didn't know what they were trying to do if they thought she was destined to lead. It was a bad idea to go against the main family, unless they thought she could free them from the seal. Just the thought of being a tool of fate among the Hyuga gave her the chills. Things were already strange, but she was afraid that this was just the beginning. "Some people can't see this," he said next. "We know the truth, though." The woman who was helping him stand up was shocked when he fell to his knees and bowed down at her feet. Everyone else in the room quickly did the same thing and bowed to her on the floor. Hinata looked around the room for help, but she couldn't find it. She was more than a little nervous and more than a little confused. "We gaze upon you with the eyes of our blood, so that we may witness the true sight of fate's chosen Hinata no Mikoto." His words didn't sound as scary as the gasps that came from everyone in the room as they all turned on their Byakugans. She could pray that the gasp didn't mean what she thought it did, but she knew that her guards had been found. Maybe the three of them would get lucky and be able to get out of the room before people stood up. Chakra pulsed almost at the same time, getting rid of the genjutsu that had let her wolves sneak into the room with her. Even as the illusion that was on them broke, her guards moved to stand in front of her with their tantos in their hands. The old man ended up being the one who decided how everyone in the room would react to these strangers. "Behold," he spoke out, "wolves watch over our goddess." The two wolves turned to face her and got down on one knee after taking a long look at her, and then giving each other a look. Hinata looked around helplessly, still very much out of place. She could really use some advice from Naruto right now. Unfortunately, Naruto wasn't here. The scratching of the pen on the paper could be heard all over the room. He tried to ignore the person in his office by following the path with his eyes almost without thinking. The meeting was in an hour. If he could just put this off for an hour, he might not have to deal with it. Of course, they both knew that was a silly dream. How did it go? His voice stopped the song of his pen, but he kept working without looking up even once. He didn't have to turn his chair around to see that Kakashi was sitting on the windowsill and giving him sad looks. Things don't look like they went as well as he had hoped they would. "Well, if I can't fail them, there's not much point in testing them," the voice answered with a bored tone, but both of them knew that wasn't the question. He didn't respond well, "I take it." He was afraid of that happening. He knew it was a risk, especially since he didn't have much information, but he really hoped it would pay off for everyone. He should have known that things would go wrong, because everything he did with the young man went wrong. In fact, he answered very well. Hiruzen could hear a page being turned, which was probably the work of one of his old students. Or, "I think he did it." Cut her off right away. The old cage turned around in alarm to look at the unnamed student. "Did he hurt her?" The man did nothing but shrug. "In words, at least. It was pretty good, but I would have liked to see a little bloodshed." Hiruzen let out a sigh of relief. He didn't want to hear that Naruto had fought with his mother, especially if it was a fight that ended in death. So he didn't want to work for her as an apprentice. "I thought that not having teammates would let him do things at his own pace. Who can say?" Kakashi shrugged again. She never had a chance to talk about it. Really, just from that, it was clear that he didn't want to talk to his old family very much. Kushina should have at least had the chance to tell him about the proposed apprenticeship. He could only imagine how angry the young man would be right now if he thought he was only on the reserves. He would have to come up with a different plan, because Naruto was too good to just wait around for a spot on a team. He might be able to find someone else to be his apprentice, or at least a teacher who could send him on missions from time to time. Even paying a Chunin team to go on missions with him wasn't a bad idea, since Naruto wouldn't have to know who was behind it. Naruto would have gotten something out of it. He would have been able to help the boy, and the village would have gained another skilled shinobi. Everyone would be a winner. Well, everyone except Kushina, but she could at least take comfort in the fact that he was doing well for himself. He couldn't help but laugh at that one. Kushina would never see it that way. All she would see is that he turned her down for a job. On the other hand, he hadn't said no because no one had asked him. He had to give them both at least a chance. Even if the boy said no, that was fine. At least he had a choice. He would likely have to bring it up himself, though. Kushina hadn't been able to say anything about it yet, but he knew that Naruto would let him talk because he was the Hokage. If he had Kushina there when he called Naruto, he could also see how the two of them got along after being apart for 4 years. That could be enough to show that this was a bad idea and help him figure out how to deal with Naruto's lack of teamwork. He wanted Naruto and Kushina to work together to make things better between them, but he wasn't going to force them to do so if it made things worse. He was Hokage before anything else. It was his job to keep Konoha and everyone who lived there safe. If that meant not trying to bring mother and child back together so that he could have 2 ninja ready to serve, so be it. Even if only one of them could serve and protect the village, that was better than both of them being too busy with their own problems to help the village they swore to protect. Really, the voice of Kakashi woke him up from his thoughts. He is quick, you know. He didn't waste any time putting her down with what he said. I thought it was pretty good, but that could be because he knew her well enough to know what to say. He shrugged his shoulders again. On the other hand, I'm pretty biased, so maybe it wasn't so good. I see. And how did he seem to feel about not being on a normal team? Well, he seemed pretty mad even before he saw Kushina, but I only had a moment to look. Oh, Kushina was waiting right outside the doors, so he saw her as soon as he walked out. But Naruto wasn't too far behind him, so I think it's safe to say that he ran out and she gave him a chance. Damn, he let out a sigh. I hope this would be a chance to start making things better. After a few moments of silence, neither man had much more to say. Kakashi, yes, Hokage-sama. I know you said quickly, but he did tell her about what happened, didn't he? The Sandame asked why. Nope, not a word. Kakashi paused. Well, now that I think about it, I guess he did hint at one thing. But I'm not even sure if that was on purpose. What happened? He told her that he wasn't her child. In a way, it's true. Hiruzen gave a sad shake of the head. Why did people with Uzumaki blood always make things so hard for everyone else? And since 2 of them don't get along, this could easily turn into a nightmare. Even worse was that Kushina had no idea what had happened while she was away. Either someone would have to tell her or she would figure it out on her own. But neither was a good choice for anyone. If no one told her, she would be mad at everyone, but he wouldn't want his enemies to have to tell her. He could, however, wish that he didn't have to do that job. How likely is it that Naruto will accept an apprenticeship? With Kushina? Yes, with Kushina. Kakashi rubbed his chin for a moment and then gave a shrug. Probably about the same as him taking one with the Yondaime. As you know, Kakashi, the Yondaime is dead. That was sort of the point, Hokage-sama. He realized as he let out another long breath that he had been sighing a lot. He wished, not for the first time, that he was the one who had sealed the Kyuubi no Kitsune all those years ago. He was starting to feel like this was too much. If he was lucky, he might be able to take a second retirement for a few years, but at this rate, heart or lung disease seemed much more likely. With his luck right now, he would still be caged when he died. Kakashi, we have a pretty big mess on our hands, don't we? No, you've made a pretty big mess of things. I only have to worry about teaching my 3 kids how to behave and paying my rent. Hiruzen let out another long sigh. Kakashi must have had a good life. She skipped through the halls, eager to get back to her own room. She didn't care that her cloak hung behind her and showed how little she was wearing underneath. She was only wearing a bra and a pair of black shorts, which reminded me of the pants she was wearing when she first arrived in AIM. Around the village's edges, it might be nice and cool, but Mikoto found that it was very hot in the middle. The constant heat and humidity made for a pretty bad situation. Some of the others might not have been bothered by the heat, or at least they didn't show it, but she thought that the Jashinist made the right choice by going shirtless. Even though he always went shirtless, she didn't care because he went through shirts so damn fast. and normally no one could see what she was wearing under her cloak. For all they knew, Pain could be standing there naked and getting a raging boner every time he called himself a god. That man was in a lot of trouble. Still, most of them did it. You couldn't become an S-class shinobi without getting into some trouble. She wasn't S-class yet, so she didn't know about any problems she might have. Then, you have to wonder if any of the S-class shinobi knew they had problems or thought they were fine. That was a very scary thought. She shook it out of her head and kept running to her room. She would have preferred to walk, both because it was the right thing to do and because it would have kept people from seeing her shirtless. However, another meeting had just ended and everyone was now behind her, so she couldn't do anything that might have seemed out of character. She knew for sure that they were all behind her or at least not in front of her, which meant that the most they would see was a little extra leg. They could use that in whatever small fantasies they made up. She had seen the looks, of course, and she didn't think they were wrong. She might wear a mask, but the only other woman in the group was Conan, who was pretty but no one really wanted to work with her. It wasn't hard to see that Pain liked his angel, and they all knew that messing with her, who had a crush on their leader, would make him angry. Even though they were all S-rank, not a single one of them wanted to face the legendary Rinnegan. Well, Hidden might, but since he was immortal, he didn't have a very good sense of danger. During her year-long stay, she talked to all of the members a few times, which was to be expected. However, her childlike behavior seemed to put off most of the people who might have tried something else. It seemed like Deidara liked it. Kasama didn't care much beyond the fact that she was a girl, and, much to Itachi's displeasure, Kasama thought Itachi was interested. She knew that he didn't know who she really was, but that didn't make her feel any better. She really didn't want to have to deal with her son trying to get with her or risk getting caught trying to stop him. She might be able to get Zetsu to act like they were dating. No, that wasn't a good idea at all. She might be able to pay Kakuzu, though. She thought that she couldn't stay hidden forever. Another part of the letter reminded her that she had been on the run for more than 10 years. Last time, she hadn't been chased by an angry Uzumaki mother. In fact, no one had been after her at all. It would be nice to go back to when I could drink and gamble without worrying about anything. Shizune, on the other hand, probably liked not having to live like that anymore. She was young, but she wasn't the kind of person who liked being on the run. Bursts of happiness, yes, but a never-ending chase where you have to take care of a drunk Sannin. No, she was probably pretty happy that they had stopped. Of course, she seemed pretty antsy at this point. Poor girl. Poor girl. At least she doesn't have to worry about Uzumaki Kushina. Well, neither did she, but Tsunade didn't think that would last for long. Kushina would figure out everything sooner or later, and she was sure that she would move to the top of the woman's shit list. Lucky her. She had brought this on herself, so she had no real reason to feel sorry for herself. However, it was nice to keep her mind off the crushing guilt by focusing on the problems and ignoring the fact that she was to blame. Sad to say, that didn't help her problems much. In fact, there wasn't much she could do to solve her problems at this point, if anything. She had been here for 4 years, but she still hadn't figured out why she had come back. No matter how she tried to make herself feel better, what she did was wrong. That was the bottom line. She knew it was even worse than that because her inaction wasn't just hurting her godson, it was hurting his whole family. Naruto, her goddaughter, and Uzumaki Kushina, whom she often thought of as a daughter, both looked to her for news about Naruto's health so that they could go back home to him. She had let everyone down, and she'd let herself down. It was too bad that she didn't see this as a chance to make her life better sooner. She was afraid of getting attached, which made sense, but it was probably just what she needed. Shizune probably wouldn't be around for much longer, and once she left, Tsunade would have nothing left. But if she had just let herself take care of the boy, even if it meant he could be taken away from her, she would have had something left in this world. Then again, she might have. Even though it might not be a person or thing, it might be just what she needed to keep going. Could she keep going just to make up for what she had done? She might not be able to fix everything, but she could keep trying for the rest of her life. Right? A small laugh came out of her mouth. What exactly did she have to lose? She would have to start with why she was brought here in the first place, because that was all she had to go on at this point. Naruto didn't even know that she was his godmother, so anything to do with that could wait. The medical side could help her with both Naruto and Kushina, and all she would need is to be on good terms with one of them to get a solid base for making things better. It would be better for her to get on Naruto's good side so he could help her with Kushina, but she couldn't deny that calming Kushina down and working with her to get them both back into his life would be good for both of them. Even though she might not have treated him well while she was here, she knew he wouldn't be too happy with Kushina after she left without warning. No matter what, she would have to start by taking care of Naruto's health. She smiled for the first time in days and started putting away her sake bottles. Shizyun. She might be able to make things better after all. Shizyun. Shizyun was surprised when she heard her master's voice after the house had been quiet. She wondered what had made the Sannin call for her. After marking where she was in her book and putting it back on the coffee table, she walked quickly to her master's room, which was only a few steps away. It was strange that it was empty. When I looked down the hall, I saw that the door to the study was open. It was strange, because her master had already bought all the sake that could be bought in regular stores days before. The first place she had cleaned out to look for more was the study. Before she went to the other rooms in the house, she quickly cleaned the room and got rid of her master's favorite vice. There couldn't have been more right. Still, this was the Senju compound, so it was more likely than she would have liked to think. Yes, Tsunade-sama. When she got to the door, she called out. As soon as he said those words, the door was opened, and she saw her master for the first time in several days. Given how she had been feeling for the past few weeks and how drunk she had been for the past few years, the big smile she was wearing now was very strange. Shizyun. The cry sounded almost happy, and for a moment she wondered if her master had turned to drugs because he didn't have any alcohol. Great, she's exactly the kind of girl I needed to see. Tsunade-sama, are you alright? When her master immediately gave her a tight hug, Shizu knew that something was very wrong. Tsunade never gave hugs. Never. I've never been better, Shizune, never been better. Ah, okay. She would have to wait until whatever was in her master's body left before she could try to figure out what was going on. So, what were you looking for? She was freed right away, and Tsunade ran back into the study and started taking medical books off the shelves. I need you to find out as much as you can about Naruto Uzumaki. Everything. Everything. On the sturdy wooden desk was a big pile of books, and her master turned around to look at her. I want everything about him, including his medical records, arrest records, and any report from Genin to ANBU that even mentions him. ANBU reports. That was a crazy request, and there was no way she could get those. She wasn't even going to try to bring it up now, because Tsunade was already acting too strangely. That's fine, but why? Shizyun could have sworn that the girl's eyes were filled with hope when she smiled back at her. Because I'll set things straight. Shizyun didn't know what was going on, but she decided to enjoy it while it lasted, no matter how strange it was. Whatever was making this happen would end soon enough. It always was. When she finally got to her safe room, she let out a sigh of relief. As she shut the door and leaned on it for support, she wondered how she could have gotten into such a mess. Hinata no Mikoto. Really, it was completely crazy, and what was worse was that they seemed to really believe it. She was not a goddess, not even close. If Naruto hadn't helped her, she would be nothing but a slave right now. Even though Naruto helped her, she seems to be in this mess because of it. He could also help her get out of it if she was lucky. A soft knock at the door broke her train of thought, and she quickly turned around and opened the door, letting her guards in. She was so focused on her new problems that she forgot that the old ones were still there. As they moved into her room, the genjutsu they used to stay out of sight shook and went away. There was no reason for her to be invisible in her quarters, where she was safe, because few people would use the Byakugan inside the compound, let alone look into the room of the daughter of their head, branch or not. But even if they did, they wouldn't be easy to see. Naruto had said that there was some kind of seal that stopped the Byakugan from working right. It would see them, but unless someone really tried, it would be hard to tell who they were. It also helped that their uniforms, which had been given to them by the Yamanaka treasury, were insulated against chakra. This made their chakra signature less noticeable and kept any chakra that might have leaked off of them. Even though it wasn't cheap and only her 4 guards wore it, there really wasn't any other way to keep her safe inside the Hyuga clan compound. She knew this, so she was a little hesitant to ask for more help. Unless, she made a thoughtful frown. Could he really use this? Would this be good for him? Even though it almost seemed too good to be true, she couldn't get rid of the feeling that she might be able to help him this time. She would need his help, but she knew that the least she could do was tell him what had happened and ask what he thought she should do next. She quickly grabbed a piece of paper from her desk and wrote down all of the important information she could think of about the situation. She signed the note in the envelope she put it in with Hinata no Mikoto. The thought that she could help the young man who had been looking out for her gave her a moment of confidence. At the very least, that would have gotten his attention. One of the wolves, who knew exactly what she was doing, grabbed the envelope and, nodding in approval of her decision to tell Naruto, they quickly ran away. She hoped that Naruto would like what she did as much as the wolf did, and he might, just might, be proud of her. She went to bed that night with a smile on her face. He woke up in a bed he was used to, in a room he was used to, with a strange weight on his right side. He was able to get up on his elbows, but when he put his left hand up to rub the sleep out of his eyes, he almost fell back down onto the bed. Mitarashi Anko was very sleepy and clingy when she looked down. He was able to get out of her arms while shaking his head at what he saw. She didn't seem to care if it was him or his pillow, and she didn't waste any time trying to crush it as she slept. She was a lot like a child for a woman who is almost a full jounin. He got ready for the day while he thought about why he didn't have a shirt on. He didn't remember taking it off last night. Hinata's letter was waiting for him when he and the girls got back from dinner, and he wanted to talk to her as soon as possible about what was going on. She probably had to meet up with her team for their first practice, but he was sure he could get her alone for a few minutes. Since Kurenai was Kurenai's jounin instructor, it probably wouldn't be a problem at all. Anko took a quick shower and changed his clothes, but he still tried to kill his pillow. He picked up her coat and skirt from the floor and put them neatly at the end of the bed. Then he went to his closet to get his cloak and sword. He changed his mind and put his cloak back on. After talking with Hinata, he might be able to train and maybe even spar with Yugao a few times. Losing or damaging his cloak would be a shame. Even though he knew it was meant to be worn, he couldn't help but feel attached to it. Even though he didn't know who sent it, he liked it a lot because it was their first gift to him. He would much rather train on a mission where it gets hurt or destroyed than here in Konoha. He quickly left the room and closed his closet door as quietly as he could so as not to wake up his guest, only to find that he had two guests. Mai looked more comfortable on his couch than Anko did. On the other hand, that could be because Mai tried to be as quiet as possible during the day, which she couldn't do when she was sleeping. When he went back to his room to get an extra blanket, he quickly realized that the Tokibetsu jounin wasn't going to give up any of them without a fight. Sighing because he didn't have any more blankets, he took off his cloak and carried it into the main room, where he carefully draped it over the shoulders of his most loyal subordinate. She calmed down more as it warmed her, and he couldn't stop his lips from curling. She looked like a totally different person when she was sleeping. When someone knocked on his door, he was about to go to the kitchen for a quick breakfast. He knew that the wolves that patrolled the apartment building wouldn't have let the person get this far if they were hostile, and he also knew that if his wolves were gone, he didn't have much of a chance anyway. He opened his front door to find an ANBU agent standing there. With his assumed name known and a hand on Emrai's tooth, he opened the door enough to show his whole head. ANBU-san, can I help you? I'm sorry I'm here so early, but Hokage-sama wants to see you in his office as soon as possible, preferably before team meetings. I get it. Did he explain why? The ANBU gave a head shake. I'm afraid not. He nodded to the shinobi standing outside his door with a sigh and a longing look toward his kitchen. Okay, tell him I'll leave right away, but I'll stop along the way to get something to eat. I will, of course, tell them. I bid you a pleasant day, Naruto-san. And that was the end of him. He took one last look inside his apartment, shook his head, and then walked out into the Konoha morning. It was going so well at first, why couldn't that have gone on until lunchtime? She knocked on the door not long after the person who owned the apartment had left. She tried again, but no one answered. When that didn't work, she looked around for a sign. A porcelain wolf looked down at her from a building nearby. A quick nod, and it was gone again. She took that as a sign that she could go in, and since she knew she would be stopped if she wasn't allowed, she turned the door handle and went in. When she saw the young woman sleeping on the couch, she smiled and quickly turned her lips down. Anko hadn't been in her apartment, which was strange since she rarely got up before 8 a.m., so she must have come from her own home and ended up here. But she couldn't have if she hadn't crashed on his couch, could she? When she peeked into the bedroom, her friend was holding onto a pillow and was all wrapped up in a bunch of blankets. That was good Anko. She looked at the clothes at the end of the bed for a moment, then frowned and turned to look at a clock. She had told her team to meet her at 9, but it was just after 6. That gave her about 2.5 hours until she had to leave, which was a lot of time for a kunoichi of her skill level to travel. She decided that her friend could sleep in a little longer since 6 was pretty early for Anko. She left the room and went to the small kitchen. She had planned to sit at the table while she waited, but she ended up making breakfast instead. It gave her something to do, and if she was lucky, it would wake Anko up. Anko could only wake up before 7 if he had sex or ate something. She would only get out of bed for one of those. She didn't want to get into bed with the woman, and since the bed didn't belong to either of them but to a newly graduated genin, she decided to make some food. She would have to pay Naruto back, of course. She might have him and Anko over to her house for dinner one of these days. If they worked together, they might even be able to get Anko to cook the next meal. She laughed a little when she thought about it. Anko was a bad cook, so they would have been better off ordering takeout and eating on her couch. They had done that so many times that Kurenai couldn't even count them. Not long after, someone else came into the kitchen by accident. It wasn't Anko, which was a shame. Have you seen Naruto-sama? Even though it was faint, the girl's face was red as she carefully held the boy's cloak. It was cute, in Kurenai's opinion. No, when I came in, he wasn't here. Would you like some breakfast? No, thank you, but I really have to go. If you see Naruto-sama, could you thank him for me? Kurenai's eyebrows went up. For what do you thank him? Late last night, the poor girl froze in shock and immediately put her hand over her mouth, her face going bright red. Last night, Kurenai gave the embarrassed girl a small smirk. She began, but Kurenai cut her off. Don't worry, I'll say thanks on your behalf. Anko's clothes were all over the room, so it must have been one crazy night. She ran out of the kitchen quickly with an even brighter blush on her face. After a few seconds, the door opened and closed, leaving Kurenai and Anko sleeping in the apartment. She's pretty, I should tease her more. She knew Mai because she had seen her several times in the past year, but they had never really talked. They said hello and wished each other well, but they usually ran into each other when one of them was leaving. She would have to try harder to talk to her from now on. But that had been fun. Naruto's walk to the Hokage Tower was uneventful, except for a quick stop at a bakery that was, luckily, open. He quickly climbed the stairs after making his purchase and getting a drink from the vending machine at the bottom of the counter. He was ready for whatever the Sandaime had in store for him. He didn't necessarily expect what he saw when he got there, though. Many people were used to seeing the Sandaime sitting back behind his desk with a pipe in his hand. But there was one thing that stood out about this well-known scene. Uzumaki Kushina stood by his desk, her bright red hair falling down her back. She was happy, too.
I will continue the story in next part. Till then, we weeb offline.